Okay, well, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are really delighted to have Candace Robb with us here today, talking about the 16th in the Owen Archer mystery series called A Lion's Ransom, and really pretty cover. And we were talking before we went live about what a terrific job Severn House has done with the backlist. And I just wanted to show a customer just bought, I
Oh,
think there's most of them here. There might be missing one, but
yeah.
bought the whole series. So
Wow.
Well,
yeah, pretty cool.
That
Um,
is amazing.
yeah, we
What
still
that
have some
person's
signed,
name?
we still have some signed copies of Fox in the Fold as well. So I'll go ahead and put a link to these books in the comments field. And if you have questions for Candace, go ahead and type them in. And Barbara will bring me back towards the end of the hour, and I'd be happy to ask any of your questions. So over to you, Barbara.
thank you very much, Patrick. We can easily order the whole set or any one of the backlist books. Just takes a few days to get them in. We have limited, excuse me, shelf space in the bookstore, so we can't always carry the entire run of, any author's books in the store. So we want to encourage you to ask for them. I do agree that I think this cover is truly wonderful. And in fact, all of their covers, I think, in the paperback editions, Candace, have been very well done.
I'm really happy with them. I know how hard that my editor worked with the artist to come up with something that would bring the whole series together. And they came up with the cloaked figure. And so in most of them, there's a cloaked figure, but they really tried to vary it.
Yes, they do. So I started out my write-up for our customers about this book by saying, once upon a time, inspired by The Name of the Rose and the Brother Cadfael series by Ellis Peters, there were many medieval mysteries, and that's barely touching it. We had Michael Jex writing them. We had Alan Gordon writing about Fess the Fool. We had, gosh, I just had a name that I just went
Margaret
right out of my
Fraser,
head again. Sorry?
Margaret Fraser and Sharon
Right.
Egan.
Sharon K. Newman was the one I was thinking about, but right, Margaret Fraser. I mean, it was all over the place, and it went back. I mean, I've got medieval mystery, but there was a lot more historical mystery, Egyptian, Victorian, the whole bit. But there was this big clutch of medieval mystery, which I found to be absolutely wonderful. And now there's hardly any. But mercifully, Candace, who's been writing it for a long time, the whole series is available. So I think the medieval period in particular lends itself to the mystery form, don't you, Candace?
Well, of course I do.
Of course you do.
Of
Well, I
course.
know it's a loaded question. I guess my answer was, I mean, my real question was, why would you think that to be true? I can say why I do, but
Yeah.
I'd be interested in why you do.
Well, I think what's wonderful for me as a writer is we have so much history, but we don't hear a lot about the everyman, the average person in the streets. And so there's a lot of imagination you can bring to it. But there was so much change going on in the 14th century with the rise of the merchant class. And I think it's a really exciting period for people beginning to kind of figure out how they can work in society and and raise their status at a time when that hadn't been very true. So I think and the raising the status is often the point where you get crime, where somebody says, "Well, I'm going to have to push this forward a little bit, and whatever it takes," and then they discover that they've run up against the crown, which really at this period the crown was the arbiter of the laws.
Very true. It was an age of faith. It was also an age of superstition. And there were, it was before electricity and gaslight and all the rest of it. I mean, it was, I always think about
Cell phones.
Evensong. Evensong is, I've always loved that prayer, protect us, how does it go? Protect us from the something of the night. But people really believe that, they would, it was probably like 4 in the afternoon in northern England, it was getting dark and, protect us from the something and something of this night. Um,
Yeah, I'm forgetting it too.
yeah, but I mean, it invokes, I think, that, that idea that the world was a dark and dangerous place, as well as, you know, um, in those areas where there was some civilization and light. Um, I've been in York, and I mean, in the 1980s, York was still had lots of medieval attributes to it. It still had
That's
the little
nice.
alleyways, you could walk the city walls, all of that. I don't know if that's true anymore because I haven't been there for a very long time, but I've always thought that York maintained its medieval,
Oh, it
um,
does.
yeah.
It really does. And that's what's so much fun when I'm plotting out the scenes. I know these streets, I know these alleys. They're still there, so many of them. And so I know that Owen can slip down this alley and he can turn this corner and see this, and so that's a lot of fun. But I think going back to your question about, why was the Middle Ages such a good time for crime? Well, of course, they didn't have the cell phones, they didn't have fast communications, so that's really great for a crime writer because Owen has to figure this out from his own ingenuity. And you've also got, all the stories of pirates. And of course, in Alliance Ransom, we've got somebody who was a pirate, being one of the main characters in the story, and kind of looking to redeem himself for his life of crime. He's been a spy, he's been a pirate. And, we know this about the Middle Ages, and it makes it kind of an exciting time to write about.
So we are now in 1377, and momentously during this whole series, Edward III, who lived a very long life for a man of his time, has been the king.
Yep,
And now he has died. His eldest son, the Black Prince, predeceased him. And
right.
so there's a child, the Black Prince's son called Richard, who is coming to be king. And this is where the War of the Roses is basically going to start,
Yeah.
with Richard and what happens to him and what happens with his uncle, Edward's brother, the Duke of Lancaster, and so forth. It's a tumultuous period in British history that goes on for over a century. It goes on until Henry VII, the Tudor king, who combines some of the bloodlines from all of this, takes the throne at the end of the next century. And then we get
Yeah,
Henry VIII and we get Elizabeth, and then that's it. The Tudor reign was actually quite short, wasn't it?
that was short, and it's very popular because, well, I think partly because it's easy to research and because everybody hates Henry VIII. But there's so much going on before that. I
Yeah.
mean, the 14th century has so much going on. And one of the things I love about this moment right now with Richard II having ascended the throne is that you've got Neville, the Baron of Raby, really trying to situate himself so that King Richard II is dependent upon him. And this is really the beginning of the rise of the Neville family, who are very important in the War of the Roses.
Absolutely. They all want to be kingmakers. If you can't be king, the next best thing is, well, we've seen that, with Elon Musk and Trump. So it's
Yeah.
it's a dynamic that continues up till today. But so Owen, who is Welsh, Owen is not a native to York.
No.
Uh, but so he's risen. He is now what's called the King's Man. But for a while he was captain of the archers and all. What does being the King's Man actually mean? Is it a real title?
Yes, he's actually in considered in the household of the royal family, which means that, not necessarily that he's a servant in the household, but he is part of their paid staff.
Okay.
and he is working as the eyes and ears of the king in the north. And it's sometimes a little difficult for him to also be captain of the city of York, which is a position that I created for Owen. It doesn't actually exist in York. And he is called, like for the coronation, Owen is called upon to go to London and to help with the coronation, with the security at the coronation. And so he's just come back from that at the beginning of this book. And yeah, it's been a choice for me about whether to have him down in Windsor and in London, or have him back in York. And I think he's more interesting in York because
Well,
I'm more
York,
interested.
yeah, I like York. I think York's more interesting in point of fact. There have been lots more books written about what goes on in London and Westminster,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
fewer in York. Now, for a long time, Owen was actually working for the Archbishop.
right. The Archbishop of York.
Yeah,
The
because
Archbishop of York now is a Neville, but he at this point has very little interest in York. So and Owen would not work for him, unless the crown told him to, because he's a man. Alexander Neville is a man that no historian has ever found anything good to say about him.
oh dear. But anyway, well, but my point was that Owen, who, arrives as a soldier, has gradually moved up in terms of
Yes, he has.
power, responsibility, his job, the whole bit. And part of that was working for the Archbishop, and now he's actually working for the Crown. So, you know, you are aging him in real time, right? Even though
Well, not
sort
a,
of.
yeah, yeah, I am. And that's so much fun because he changes, his family changes. Um, there are children who had very little part in the books earlier that now, they're older and they're talking and they have opinions. And so I get to use them. I really like that. I really wanted to show a life. I mean, part of what I'm doing in the series is showing how the big moments in the 14th century affected the everyday person, how the city of York is affected by the coronation in this case, and the goldsmiths deciding, what are we going to make to impress the king? And they make this golden lion from, to replace something that he'd lost as a child and they think is really going to solidify their position with him. And it's stolen. And you've got the coronation, but you've also got the people of York and the merchants of York, and how all of this is going to affect them. And I like that. I like that we're seeing, because it's what I always wanted to do, is imagine what it would be like to be there in the 14th century in York.
Would you actually want to live there? If you could step through the wardrobe like Narnia, would you step through the wardrobe and live in York in the 14th century?
I'd be very tempted, especially with the way the world is going right now.
Yes. Yeah, I bring that up because there's an interesting book by Kate Quinn who has written some historicals called The Astral Library. And she's clearly been affected by Narnia, but what she has is a young woman whose life is not going well in modern Boston, and she steps through a door in the Boston Public Library, magically arrives in this other library, the Astral Library, and what happens is that she can choose to live in a book. And the question is, if she can choose to live in a book, what book will she choose? And will she choose it to be temporary or will she choose it to be forever? And that's the question that Kate is asking the reader. And I have had these interesting conversations for the last few days with people. If you could choose to live in a book, what book would you choose? And, there are pluses and minuses. Think of all the things that you would be vulnerable to in 14th century York.
Absolutely.
especially as a woman, you know,
Mhm.
medical care and all the rest of it. You wear glasses, have had eye surgery, the whole bit. What would we give up? What would we gain? And, but I just think it's a fascinating question for people who love books. If you could pick that one book, what book would it be?
Mm.
I'm not asking you to do it. I'm just saying that that's the question. And I keep thinking about it. What book would I choose if I could actually do that?
Yeah, I'd want something really escapist these days.
I mean, would you choose to put yourself like in a thriller where, you're surrounded by danger? Would you choose to go to Pemberley and, pretend you were one of the household, what would you do? And
Mm,
that's another question is we always imagine when we go back to the past that we're going to be like one of the upper 10 and
that's
not,
true.
we're not going to be, the skivvy cleaning the fireplace or hauling water. And yet the odds are that we would be if we actually went.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I know. I've often asked myself, well, if I went back into the Owen Archer books, would I prefer being Lucy because then I'd have Owen? And or would I prefer being Magda Digby because she is just an awesome person?
Well, that's a good point.
Or
Anyway,
would I want to be Owen?
well, there's that too, because you're not obliged to take your own sex if
I
you're
don't
going to
think
do
so.
this.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Well, Lucy, I'm glad you mentioned her because we've talked about Owen, but Lucy has been a partner and a major player in the whole Owen Archer story. And because she's an apothecary, she does have some skills and other things that the ordinary person in
Yes,
14th century York doesn't have.
right. And she's important. I'm really playing with the book that I'm working on now is set in the middle of the poll taxes when everybody is up in arms about the taxes. And she is someone having an apothecary who really has her finger on the pulse of the city. She hears everything. She hears everybody's problems. I mean, because they come in when they can't sleep, when they're in their digestion is terrible. They're asking her if they can extend their credit because they've put all their money into the poll taxes. It's a really interesting. I haven't used her enough, I think. I'm really trying to use her in this new book, but I do, she is often the one who really helps Owen figure out whether someone was poisoned, whether, there's any residue. But she also is a very, very good study of people because of being an apothecary. And an apothecary was, much more active with the clients than a pharmacist would be today. I mean,
Well,
she's really,
apothecaries actually were for frontline physicians.
yeah, and she's, changing, a physic to fit the particular person. So she really gets to know people and observe them, and I'm trying to use her more in this new book, but I really like in Alliance Ransom that because I have Martin Werther living with Owen and Lucy, and he's never really observed their marriage. He appreciates things. He can notice things about Owen and Lucy, and he comes to really respect Lucy
Hmm.
and her wisdom. And I like that about. I didn't know why he kept having these point of view scenes at the beginning of the book when I was writing it. I thought, what is Martin doing here? Why am I doing this? And of course, it becomes very much a book about his desire to somehow redeem himself for his life of crime, spying and but he's also really curious about what it must be like to live in a household where You have a loving couple, you have children, you have these jobs and this responsibility to the community. It was really fun looking at Owen and Lucy and their marriage and the family from his eyes in this book.
I'm trying to remember, but when Owen came to York way back at the very beginning, Lucy was a widow. Was she not a widow?
No, not she.
No.
She is a widow by the end of the book, but
Okay,
she's
but I'm sorry,
yeah.
but anyway, she was a widow. Therefore, she had property. She had her apothecary, which Owen might not have had access to all that when he, arrived in the city.
Oh,
But when he marries Lucy, he acquires, she's a businesswoman, not everybody was, and she's a woman of property, which not everybody was. And in point of fact, for a long time, I think, um, in the long span during the Middle Ages and on, being a widow was actually almost the best thing a woman could be.
yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually debated when I was writing that book, but of course, Owen was too hot for her to resist. But I had thought,
Right.
am I really being very kind to Lucy, having her remarry so quickly?
Right.
Because being a widow was, yes, you had a lot more rights, a lot more status.
Yeah, well, that's
She
right. You
also,
had control of your money, you had control of your property, you weren't in danger of childbirth. I mean, I mean, marriage was really risky for women.
yeah,
There were no contraceptives in those days and whatever. And enormous numbers of women died of complications of, childbirth and after effects. And so, as a widow, she's not subject to all that.
right. But she also, at that point, her one child has died of the pestilence. So,
Yeah. So
yeah, she's,
maybe
she's
maybe
very
that
much
was
alone.
sure. And I mean, and that would be the other side of it. But
Yeah,
I know, I mean, even in Victorian times, being a widow was a good thing, for
yeah,
so anyway, they become a couple from a way back. And so you have written the story of a marriage as well as the story of Owen's career
yeah.
and the story of the political evolution. Although it was pretty quiet for a long time under Edward, wasn't it? I mean, I don't remember big rebellions against Edward III.
No, no. I mean, he was a popular king.
Right.
It's toward the end when he is not successful in any of his, well, actually his sons are not successful in any of their skirmishes over in France when he's decided to claim France, that he begins to, he's overtaxing the people. He is, challenging them to believe in him. And then, of course, Alice Preres comes in, and
Yeah.
the people are disaffected by that. They feel that he's betraying their beloved Queen Philippa even after her death. So he was getting a little rocky toward the end of his reign, but it's a real mess now because you have a
Yeah.
child king and there's always that worry. And the Spanish and the French are taking advantage of that. I mean, there's been a lot of damage to the ports in the south of England, and England really had no navy. So Neville is really hoping to make his name as an admiral who has had some experience, because they need to shore up their navy. They need to use the merchant vessels to fight the French and the Spanish, who are taking advantage of this opportunity when the government is still trying to figure out how it's going to operate. And
Right.
that's another issue that comes up in Alliance Ransom, is the spies that they know are in York, French and Spanish spies looking at the shipping, because right now the shipping is, I mean, really, England's navy was her merchant vessels.
Right. And I mean, York was an important city and part of the wool trade, right?
Right.
And with trading partners in, Right, they were more going what, towards Flanders? And I mean, if you were in York, it was less about France, wasn't it? And more about, sorry about the dogs, I can't shut them up.
Oh, that's all
Uh,
right. We may have a cat in here soon. We never know. The wool trade was in the Low Countries, but you also have um, a lot of the wool custom being over in Calais. So Calais is still important.
okay,
And of
it's
course,
on the
it's
channel, yeah.
it's also an avenue into um, the north of France and into the Low
Right.
Countries.
But we tend to think of, much more about England trading with France than we do
That's
remember
true.
the Hanseatic League and, the North Sea trade and
Oh, that was so much more important.
yeah, and Flanders, Belgium, whatever, was a huge weaving center. I mean, many of the world's great tapestries were woven there. And Tracy Chevalier wrote a really fabulous book, the name of which escapes me. But I've always loved medieval tapestries, and so it was a book about weaving a version of the unicorn tapestries and so forth. So, York was a major trading city. There, rivers, the whole bit. I mean, England's always been a major um, merchant company.
Yeah, and you bring up the Flemings, and there's a Flemish weaver who's in the center of this book
Right.
too. His death is one of the I think the big tragedy in the middle of this book. And the Flemish were, they had been living in York for quite a while, and they had been brought over by York merchants
Right.
to improve their status in the kind of cloth that they produced, but they were never considered, Englishmen. And so they were always the foreigners. And I wanted to point that out too, because Martin Werther is a Fleming, and he feels this well, especially while they're looking for spies, and people think that maybe these murders that have happened in the city are, the criminals are the spies. So the foreigners are now the people who are distrusted, who are chased on the streets. And Martin Werther has his share of trouble from just the average person on the street in this book.
Well, immigrants have always been, here we are again, regarded with suspicion by the home people. But what we also have in this book is we have the goldsmiths and the guildmaster because in order to try to, as Candace pointed out, um, make an impression at court and curry favor and so forth, the goldsmiths get together and decide they're going to create this amazing gift, which turns out to be this lion made of gold. And then there are questions about how to transport it safely to London. Doesn't go
Yes,
well.
yes, it doesn't go well at all. What I kind of enjoyed working on in at the beginning of the book is just how sort of fed up the goldsmiths are with each other, because each one has, their specialty and their opinion about, like, the presentation box, what the box should look like that the lion will be transported in and presented to the king with, just the small things that you just know. These are all, important people who have, they are the goldsmiths. They are not the apprentices in the shops. They all have this status to uphold, their reputations, and they're all right. Each one of them is right and the other person is wrong. And then when it starts becoming, who's been talking to who and who might have had a reason to steal this gold lion, it's I had some fun with that. That
Of course you did. But I mean, to be realistic, if the goldsmithies had to contribute gold towards the, making of the lion, then all of them take a hit when,
oh yeah.
when it's stolen. I mean, it's an out-of-pocket loss for all of them, and they probably can't afford to, muster up more gold and make another lion.
No, no. And the fact is that for the most part, and this was interesting research when I was looking into this at the beginning to think how to work this, that the gold comes from gold coin, which is not plentiful. It is not the major source of coin that you use to buy something because it's worth a lot of money. So a gold coin isn't something that everybody has a lot of. So when a lot of gold coins starts showing up in York, you know, something's going on.
Right.
Somebody's being paid for something.
But
And
England is not really, it's not a source of gold. I mean, England's full of gold mines, and so it's a difficult commodity to get. The other thing about gold is super heavy, and so you can't make a real line, life-size line
and
or anything. Nobody'd be
it's
able to
not
move it.
large. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had to figure out, okay, now what could reasonably
right. What could you transport reasonably if you
yeah.
made a
Yeah.
solid gold figure? And then that also raises the question: if somebody steals it, how did they transport it? You can't just throw it in your saddlebag and right away.
Well, you can. I mean,
Well,
because this is about this big. I
yeah,
mean,
but it's still heavy, isn't
it
it?
isn't that, but it's still very heavy. Yeah. And yeah, so I had a lot of fun with this because once in a book you decide, well, this is the center image, you have to deal with it all the way through. How would they have put this together? Who would be able to afford this? How are they going to transport it? Are they going to listen to Owen about how careful they need to be about locking it up? And he's pretty disgusted with them when he finds out that,
Well, reasonably so. And,
yes,
then are you going to get it back is another question, or will it
right,
eventually
right.
fulfill its mission and be delivered, to the court, which was, after all, the whole idea. So, yeah, there are a lot of questions involved there. You make it more complicated by having several goldsmiths involved. It wasn't like a gift from one goldsmith,
Right.
which would have made a different dimension to the whole problem.
Yeah, and that wouldn't have been very likely
No,
if it were something that large. I mean, that would have to be quite a wealthy goldsmith, and then that
yeah,
would create a whole nother story because where did he get such wealth?
exactly. No, it would not be. So you've had a lot of fun exploring, I like to call it the scene of the crime, the scenery of the crime. York
Yeah.
is there's the River Ouse over here. There's, a lot about York you can explore. So in this book, what is the major scenery of the crime? Not taking the gold out of York, but what part of the city do you really highlight in this book?
It's a lot to do with the staves because of the shipping, and that's a part of the story. And there's also the body that's found in the river toward the beginning of the book, and so it's a lot, going on along the river, but then it's also pretty much um, kind of the Minster area and Petergate and Colliergate, where a lot of the action takes place.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, right. Yeah, of course. I mean, the Minster is in many ways the beating heart of York, where, yeah,
right.
um,
And it's
still
always
is.
fun too. It still is, yeah. I
It
mean, it's
really,
always amazing to well, like go to see the Messiah and at the Minster, and the whole town is there. It's just
right.
wonderful.
When I was last in York, it was after the fire in the Rose Window, had
Oh,
been
yeah.
destroyed and it was being rebuilt. And I stayed in a wonderful, I don't know what exactly call it, less a hotel than maybe an inn anyway, in the Bootham Bar Gate, which is adjacent to
Oh,
the
right.
Minster. So
Yeah.
if you stay there on the top floor, you can actually imagine that you are in medieval York listening to the bells and the whole bit. But the fire and the destruction of the Rose Window was such a trauma for the city and
Oh, it
it was
was.
kind of an early version of losing, Notre Dame. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and I think a lot of people then went back and read, or for the first time read Ken Follett's wonderful book, about
Mm,
building a minster. And Durham Cathedral is actually, in many ways, my favorite of all the British
it's
cathedrals.
striking, isn't it? It's
Well, I love the fact that it's the Palatinate Cathedral. It's where the clergy are allowed to wear purple, and it has some wonderful history attached to it. And I've been up on the roof. You can do that if you go visit it. You can go up on the leads and you can look out over the countryside and imagine there wasn't anything else of that height.
no,
I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine how those cathedrals dominated, the landscape because
they really
everything
do.
else was pretty low
You know,
level.
you can kind of feel that when you're around York because you'll be tooling down the highway and all of a sudden you see it.
Yeah,
You see the Minster and it's you're miles away from the city and that's all you see so far
right.
is the Minster. You don't see the rest of the city. I always love that. That's so amazing. Unlike like I love Wells Cathedral with
Yeah,
its worn steps, but it's more down in a cavity, and so is St. David's, another one of my favorite
yeah.
cathedrals in Wales.
They're
They're
smaller.
down they're down in a cavity, so you don't have that oof of being out in the countryside and seeing that enormous. Yeah, they're smaller.
They
Uh,
are smaller. Yeah. I mean, increasingly with the, rage for small buildings and all these awesome structures that dominated the countryside. Last time I was in London, which was a year ago, June, I was staying by St. Paul's Cathedral and went down to the Millennial Bridge. I might have told you this, and I looked south towards the tower and it's invisible because of all the giant steel high rises and everything. Now, the tower
no, no,
once dominated,
that's true.
the eastern end of the city, and now you really can't see it
Wow.
unless you are close to it because it's completely obscured by, the enormous vertical buildings and construction. And I think the sort of shock and awe that once people felt when they sailed by, Trader's Gate and by the tower is not there anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of been like that for a while. I remember doing one of those boat cruises several times up and down the Thames,
Right.
and when you look at the tower, you think, wow, that was such a terrifying place. But now it's in the middle of this hulking city.
Right.
And so it doesn't, St. Paul's is still pretty impressive.
It
And
is. But of
Westminster
course, it's
is
not the St.
fun.
Paul's it's not the St. Paul's of
Right.
the 14th century either,
Well, no.
which was, a smaller structure. We're looking at the 17th century and the rebuilding
Or
by
another
Robb.
fire.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's true. Cities are constantly reinventing themselves, and as land is getting scarcer, there's more pressure, to build up.
I think that's one of the reasons why York is still such a wonderful place
Mhm.
to get a feel for what it was like because it's not an industrial center or a banking center.
Right.
So it doesn't, I mean, it has more big buildings than it did when I first went there, but it's never going to be something like London. And so you'll still be able to see the walls and imagine what it was like
Mhm.
at the
Well,
time.
Durham also. I mean, the university is probably the larger economic engine in Durham. So yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, I have to say that this book, Alliance Ransom, is one of my favorite in the series.
okay.
I rarely say about a book, but I something about this book, I had fun with it from the get-go. And usually when I'm going through revisions, when it comes back from my editor with questions and things, it's a little tarnished for me by that time. I'm ready for the next book and kind of tired of this. And every time I had to read the book, I just loved it. And I think it's Martin Werther. I think he's a character that I've been curious about because he's been kind of a shadowy character in several of the books, but never really understood his background. And I felt like he really came alive for me in this book, and I enjoyed that. And I really liked Emma, the youngest of Owen and Lucy's
Yeah.
children. Her personality comes out in this. I mean, I've kind of teased a little bit about it earlier that she's kind of a singing rhymer, and she's a very imaginative child. She loves singing, but she's this wise little being in this book who really befriends Martin Werther, and he loves Hugh and Emma. And I don't know, there were just all sorts of stuff in this book that it was hard to give it up.
I can see that, but of course you had to give it up at some point or it wouldn't be book 16. But
Exactly.
that's nice. It probably sends you into book 17 on you know, positive
Yeah,
note at a high scale there.
yeah, looking for okay. And so yeah, that was when I decided that Lucy had to have more of a role in this new book because she hasn't had enough of a role in the most recent books. Earlier on, especially like in The Nun's Tale, she was very important.
Right.
But in this one, I really wanted. I'm trying to use her more.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, you're now entering into, you know, a very um, perilous time politically,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so there's going to be a lot going on that doesn't necessarily even have to relate to a crime. You know, there's going to be much political unrest and so forth. So you've got a chance here for some different stories. You know,
yeah,
some spy stuff, some traitor stuff.
and always trying to make sure that although this very important historical backdrop is there, the story is about the people. The story is about the individuals
Right.
um, and how it's affecting them. So, yeah.
Well, a joy of reading the series has been to watch the Archer family evolve. And you know, I really enjoyed every chapter in their life. You know, I wondered when I first met Owen way back at the beginning how this Welsh Archer was going to, you know, how he was going to do because you know, he's an outsider. I
Yeah.
mean, and you know, England was very parochial. And so I wondered how that would go. And then Lucy was kind of partly an answer to that, you know, because he married somebody that was important locally. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's been wonderful to watch them have children and the children grow and his career grows and all the rest of it. But you're right, she's been left behind. So I do think
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be wonderful for you to take some time to explore that. And maybe, you know, maybe as an offset to the um, political
Mm.
unrest and so forth, a domestic kind of a story, you know, will do well.
Yeah.
Yeah, see. Well, I'm already looking forward to book 17. So, Patrick, come and tell us if we have questions or comments from the audience for Lion's Ransom.
Maybe Patrick isn't.
Oh, he'll be
There he
back.
is.
There he is.
There he is.
I'm here. Um, this is a kind of a quiet group tonight.
Ah,
It's raining here in Phoenix, which means that
well, it's
people.
raining in Seattle
Is
too.
it? Well, I mean, yeah, but you expect it in Seattle. It's
That's true.
more, it's a rare event here.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that you kind of touched on at one point that we were talking about is that it seems eerie how I'll be writing about the politics of the 14th century, and like with the immigrants in this book in Alliance Ransom, it's echoing what's happening now. I was writing about the plague when we were having COVID. I mean, it's uncanny how we are following the 14th century. And, moving into the tax riots, I'm just thinking, okay, what's coming next?
Well, we have a government that wants to reinvent itself as a court. I mean, people talk about fascism, but I personally think they're trying to, it's like Henry VIII. Very much the same dynamic as around the Tudor court is what we're seeing at the moment.
Certainly with the ballroom.
Well, that too. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah, that's what's, so you're right. The history, everything, everything old is new again
Yeah,
is great to what's going on. But it's comforting in a way, to realize that these things have happened before and yet somehow
that's
we
true.
all survived
That's,
and, move forward and nothing stays the same.
mhm.
And every time there is like a whole new tech revolution, which is where we are with AI and so forth. And we're starting to look at job displacement and, you know, all these different things happening. It's a very uncertain world at the moment for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it will be true in 1377 and 70.
Oh,
It's the same thing.
yep, yep. I'm jumping to 1379 in this book, so
Okay. But
yeah.
Edward is still going to be a child king, and there's still going to be all these dynastic stuff going on.
Oh yeah.
Have you
Anyway,
talked at all about the other books, the Kate Clifford books or the Margaret Kerr that you did?
no, we haven't.
We haven't. No. No, the Kate Clifford were fun because I knew that I probably couldn't cover the the overthrow of Richard II's throne with Owen because he'd be pretty old by then. So that was one of the reasons that I decided to just jump forward with a new character. And it was fun working on that. I really enjoyed that. I don't know that I'm finished with that series yet because, but I just keep going back to Owen Archer. So,
Well, yeah, you're right. Keep your options open. If you don't kill anybody, you have a chance to revisit them.
but I really enjoyed having Kate with her two wolfhounds and the axe hidden in her skirts, and she was a fun character.
Yeah, she
A
really
really
was.
fun character. And I sort of left everything up in the air about who she was going to choose as her amour.
Well, and it may call to
I
you
had
to
a lot
go
of
back
questions
and,
about that.
yeah, it may call you to go back and write about it at some point.
Yeah, I haven't decided.
Are there any other historical periods that kind of appeal to you, like for
I've been
different?
reading a lot about the French Revolution, which was always a kind of a fascination with me. I was really interested in, what was the truth about Marie Antoinette, and then that got me into the French Revolution. And I just read a really interesting book that takes A Tale of Two Cities and puts it in the fairy realm
Hmm.
um, with Charles Darnay and no, I'm going to forget Sidney Carton being the human and the changeling
Yeah.
because they look alike. It was called A Far Better Thing, and I can't remember the name of the author. And I just read it the other. Oh, I probably have it written down somewhere down here, but that was fun. And so yeah, if I had all the time in the world, I would probably do something with the French Revolution because it just was a really horrific but fascinating time.
One, it would be better not to actually have to live through.
Oh, yeah, that I definitely would not want to.
Right. I would not want to go. I would not want to choose a book set during if I wanted to go and live in a book, it would not be a book set during the French Revolution. That's for
No,
sure.
no. And I've always been fascinated with the Vikings and all of that. So
Well, there's a Viking history in
earlier,
New York, I mean, that's something
moving earlier would be kind of fun.
yeah, I was there shortly after they discovered, the Viking settlement, and you got to take a little kind of Disney kind of a, little train through the Viking thing, and they left it with appropriate smells and terrible sewage. And
Oh, it's
I
fun.
always admired British gas for, not screwing it up.
No, Jorvik Center is just the Viking Center is just so much fun. And after that big flood about 10 years ago, they had to redo a lot of it, and
Ah,
it's even better.
really?
It's really amazing. I mean, some of those characters that you drive by
Right.
are created out of actual skeletons and, recreations of what their faces would have looked like, and that's really eerie. They're very realistic.
Hmm.
And there are the wonderful smells.
Yes.
Not always
Right.
wonderful.
But York is such a great history, Roman history, Viking history, medieval history, it's a fascinating city.
Yeah.
Anything else, Patrick?
Not really.
All righty. Well, Candace, it's always been a pleasure. It is
Oh, it's
always a
always
pleasure
wonderful.
to talk to you.
Yeah.
And I do really love this book, Alliance Ransom. For those of you who maybe have never read Candace's Owen Archer series, you could certainly start here. But since all of the paperbacks are available, if you have the time and inclination, you can go back to the beginning and read your way forward. It isn't that the plots carry over, but what you get when you read from the beginning forward is the character development.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of these characters that come back through the series,
Right.
like Martin Werther, you see them in different phases of their lives, and it means more when you come across them in one of the later books because
Exactly.
you've
Yeah,
had this
no, I
history
think
with
so
them.
too. And we've talked about this is a portrait of a marriage, and
Yeah.
if you it becomes more of one if you read it from the beginning forward.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can certainly read Alliance Ransom, and we do still have autographed copies of this really beautiful book. So do order one, and I'll look forward to talking to Candace when we get to book 17 and we get to talk more about Lucy.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Good night.